Besides these weekly updates on the market, I also do a much longer monthly webinar. And I did one of those last week, and I presented a slide where I kind of gave my template about how Donald Trump's tariff talks interact with the market and how the market interacts with what Donald Trump is going to say about tariffs. And basically the model I presented was that Trump loves tariffs, and then when the mood hits him, he'll threaten tariffs, and that will cause volatility in the market. It'll cause stocks to drop, bond yields to go up, and then at a certain point, Trump will walk back what he said about the tariffs. Markets will stabilize, equity markets will start going up, and then after a period of time, Trump will get his confidence back to talk about tariffs, and he'll threaten tariffs again, and the whole cycle will start again. As I said, I presented that slide on a Wednesday, and sure enough, on Friday, something with the European Union must have set off Trump, because he threatened the EU with 50% tariffs almost immediately. And the way the market reacted to that is the S&P 500 on Friday just dropped about 0.8%. One of the signs that maybe the market's starting to get used to this pattern is that it only dropped by 0.8%, because although that's a larger than average move, it's hardly a gigantic move. And if indeed I'm correct that the market's starting to get used to the Trump tariff pattern, what happened after that certainly reinforces what's going on, because by Sunday Trump had said, okay, maybe we're not going to put on those tariffs immediately, we'll delay them a month, and by Tuesday, when the market reopened from the Memorial Day holiday, Trump was saying, hey, actually talks about trade with the EU aren't going so badly. In fact, they're going kind of good, and we'll probably come up with a deal with them. On top of that comment about that positive comments Trump made, we also had consumer confidence numbers, or consumer confidence survey numbers from the Conference Board come out on Tuesday, and they showed a big jump in consumer confidence. So consumer confidence had been dropping for 5 straight months down to April, basically because people were worried about the tariffs. And sure enough, with Trump moderating some of his tariff threats and the trade war with China in May, there was a big rebound, much bigger than anyone expected. The Conference Board index went from 86 to 98. So from a depressed level of 86, they already went up to 98, which is about average. You know, you think of 100 as being average. Now, the other thing that's really been influencing the market is Trump's big, beautiful budget moving through Congress. The first thing I have to say about that budget is that the market appears to be thinking that Congress would not address the high levels of debt that the U.S. has. And sure enough, it didn't. You know, if you were listening a year ago to members of the Republican Party speak, that they made it sound like one of their priorities would be to get the high levels of U.S. debt versus its GDP down, you know, get that under control. But in actual fact, the version of the budget that the House passed last week kind of makes it a little bit worse. And the bond market reacted by dropping in yield a little bit. So even though, it does appear like the Treasury market is saying, you know, they made the U.S. debt situation a little bit worse, but we were worried that they were going to make it a lot worse. So we're happy at least a little bit. Now the Senate still has to pass their version of the bill, and they might modify some of the things that's in the House version, and eventually a compromise version will be passed by both houses, and that will become law and signed by President Trump. One of the things, the reason why the budget doesn't reduce debt is that the Republicans, who are the majority in both the House and Senate, were fully committed to keeping Trump's very large income tax cuts from his first administration in place instead of letting them expire. So if you look at the way this budget impacts various income groups in the U.S., since the lower income groups do not pay much income tax, and because in this budget there are programs being cut that benefit lower income people, they actually come out marginal losers from this budget. Whereas the higher income people who pay a lot of income tax because they're higher income, they're the big winners from this budget. And that allows me to segue back to talking about U.S. consumer confidence. So one of the themes that you're hearing during the year when people are analyzing the stock market is that consumer spending is flagging a little bit, but not among the higher income people. And one of the examples they give are stocks like Visa, like people who have credit cards tend to be higher and spend on those credit cards tend to be higher income people. And you can just see from Visa's share price, business at Visa is doing very well. But also when you hear the comments from Visa, from MasterCard, from American Express share price has not been doing quite as well. That's still been generally positive about their customers using the cards quite a bit. So basically the higher income people are the people who are in better shape. Now, the consumer spending is very important to the U.S. economy. It's 2/3 of the U.S. economy. So when we got that big jump in consumer confidence, and like I said, a jump was expected, but not nearly as large on Tuesday, how did consumer discretionary stocks react? Well, if you look at the S&P index, well, the answer to that is you shouldn't look at the S&P index because the consumer discretionary sector in the S&P index is just very heavily weighted to Tesla and Amazon. So it basically just tells you how those two stocks are doing. So you shouldn't look at that. There's also an equal value weighted index, and there's a ticker, there's an ETF for that with the ticker RSPD. Now that went up, that gives you a better idea how generally consumer discretionary stocks did. That went up 2.6% last night. So that's a little bit disappointing in terms of, how strong that number was, because the over 2.6% is a very good move, but when the overall market's up 2%, 2.6% doesn't sound like superb. If you look at consumer discretionary so far this year, they're down slightly. And so once again, that sort of makes sense because the tariff worries, the U.S. economy slowing down, the U.S. job market, which is still pretty strong, but it's definitely not as tight as it was last year. It makes sense that consumer discretionary has not been at least outperforming the S&P 500, although it's hardly been a big underperformer. If you look at the RSPD over the last 3 months, what have been the stocks that have been outperforming in that index? And there have been things like Ulta Beauty, Ralph Lauren, Booking.com, Royal Norwegian Cruise Line, Carnival Cruise Line. Those aren't exactly associated as luxury brands, maybe Ralph Lauren a little bit, so you can't really draw that, the higher income people. But definitely in terms of going on cruises or Booking.com, booking holidays, that's not the lower income people. So you kind of see that over the last 3 months return. On the bottom, who hasn't been outperforming? Well, Starbucks has been struggling, but that doesn't mean that the coffee business is bad because Starbucks is one of its littler competitors. Dutch Bro shares are up like 100% over the last year, and they're very strong this year. So the problems at Starbucks are probably unique to Starbucks. Decker, which makes Hoka shoes, they're doing very poorly. That seems to be a fashion thing because other shoe companies are doing much better. So maybe Hoka shoes are just falling out of fashion. I don't think you can draw any conclusion. And Nike has also been an underperformer. Nike has kind of changed, tried to increase the percentage of its sales where people buy it directly from Nike online. That turned out to be a bad strategy, and they're changing that strategy back. And while they're sort of going through this sort of restructuring of strategy thing, their share has not done so well. So I don't think we can draw any conclusions from the underperformers and from the outperformers. Maybe I'm drawing a little bit too much into it, except to say that the travel business is something that has the shares of companies related to travel have been outperforming over the last 3 months, or at least those ones that are in the consumer discretionary index. So that concludes my presentation for the week.